Clint Eastwood has been the face of the Western for over half a century, appearing in some of the most iconic, groundbreaking films that the genre has ever seen. So in this video, I'm going to attempt to rank all 16 Western movies that Clint Eastwood ever starred in, from the misfires to the masterpieces. So kicking things off, we have Ambush at Cimarron Pass, which features Clint Eastwood's first big screen role in a Western. And in the film, he plays Keith Williams, a soldier in a group of former Confederates who reluctantly team up with a patrol of soldiers in order to survive a dangerous trek for Apache territory. But unfortunately, Ambush at Cimarron Pass is the epitome of a B-Western, suffering from uninspired direction, a sluggish pace, and an overall lack of action. However, Eastwood does his best with the limited script, while clearly still learning his craft, delivering a raw, earnest performance that feels light years away from the cool, stoic persona that he would later become famous for. And even though there are brief glimpses of it, there's just not enough to salvage what is ultimately a totally forgettable, unremarkable Western that's only really remembered for the fact that it starred Clint Eastwood before he was famous. Up next, we have Paint Your Wagon, which was probably the strangest Western that Clint Eastwood ever starred in, purely for the fact that it was a musical. So Eastwood takes on the role of Pardner, a mild-mannered prospector who falls in love with a married woman during the California Gold Rush. So Paint Your Wagon was an odd career move for Eastwood, given that he wasn't exactly a natural singer, and his character was very far removed from his popular tough guy persona that he'd spent his entire career building, which opened the film up to a whole lot of mockery. Now that's not to say that Paint Your Wagon is a bad film, but other than a superb performance from Lee Marvin and a few catchy songs, it hasn't really stood the test of time, held back by its uneven tone and almost 3-hour-long runtime. At number 14, we have Cry Macho, a recent neo-western drama directed by and starring Clint Eastwood, at the impressive age of 91. So Eastwood plays an elderly, washed-up rodeo star, who heads out on a mission to escort a young boy from Mexico back to his father in the US, becoming an unlikely mentor to the teenager along the way. So as you might expect, Cry Macho is full of heartfelt moments and family drama, exploring themes of redemption and aging, which Eastwood tackles with sincerity and candor. The only problem is that for the most part, the plot lacks tension and often feels slow-paced, leaving it to Clint Eastwood to carry the film, which never quite captures the spark of his earlier work, despite still being an enjoyable movie. At number 13, we have The Beguiled, which is not strictly a Western, but more of a Southern Gothic psychological drama set during the Civil War. And in the movie, Eastwood plays a wounded Union soldier who takes shelter in an all-girls boarding school where his presence slowly begins to unravel the fragile dynamic of the women living there. So unlike the cool, collected gunslinger roles that made him famous, here Eastwood deliberately plays against type, portraying a manipulative and morally questionable character in what was easily one of the most daring performances of his early career. This makes The Beguiled a strange yet compelling watch, with a really eerie, hypnotic atmosphere, but the film does feel uneven at times and can be a disturbing watch given the way that it approaches some of the darker themes in its story. But with that being said, The Beguiled is still worth checking out and offers a rare opportunity to see Eastwood playing a true villain. So up next, we have Joe Kidd, one of the last Western movies that Clint Eastwood starred in that he didn't direct himself. Set in New Mexico, the film follows a former bounty hunter who's hired by a wealthy landowner to help him settle a land dispute between him and a group of Mexican revolutionaries. Now there are a fair few twists and turns along the way, but on the whole, Joe Kidd is a fairly standard Western, in that it features everything you would expect from one without ever really putting its own spin on the genre. However, Clint Eastwood still delivers a badass performance, and there are some memorable moments, but overall the story feels very thin and muddled, meaning the film never quite lives up to its potential, despite having all the ingredients to be something special. At number 11, we have Bronco Billy, a modern Western comedy drama directed by and starring Clint Eastwood. And on this occasion, he plays an aging trick shot performer in a failing Wild West show that he's determined to save, striking up a relationship with a spoiled heiress who he believes might help turn his fortunes around. So more than anything else, Bronco Billy is just a fun, light-hearted movie, in which Eastwood is able to show off his more comedic side, delivering a warm, self-deprecating performance as an over-the-top performer in a movie that feels like a genuine love letter to the fading traditions of the Wild West. But unfortunately, the film does lose momentum at times and can feel overly sentimental, but it's still an enjoyable movie that's well worth checking out. So next up, we have Coogan's Bluff, a modern western crime thriller set in the late 60s. And Eastwood plays a straight-laced, no-nonsense Arizona deputy called Walt Coogan, who's forced to take matters into his own hands during a mission to extradite a prisoner from New York. So the film is essentially a fish-out-of-water tale that demonstrates the contrast between modern law enforcement and frontier-style justice, leading to lots of action and badass moments from Eastwood, who really gives the role his all. But it is very much a film of its time, and does feel somewhat underwhelming by today's standards, despite inspiring a lot of other similar movies and TV shows upon its release. So Coogan's Bluff is a solid Clint Eastwood film that, although dated, is still entertaining, and will really appeal to fans of the Dirty Harry movies. So next, we have Two Mules for Sister Sarah, an original western starring Clint Eastwood alongside actress Shirley MacLaine. And the story follows a gruff, pragmatic drifter called Hogan, who reluctantly agrees to escort a seemingly helpless nun across the Mexican desert during the French intervention. And of all the westerns on this list, there are perhaps none as guilty of trading in on the popularity of the Dollars trilogy as this film, as Clint Eastwood essentially reprises his role as the man with no name in a movie that was clearly inspired by the spaghetti western genre, making Two Mules for Sister Sarah a rewarding watch, even though it does feel like a pastiche of superior movies that came before it. At number 8, we have Hang 'em High, an original western starring Clint Eastwood as Jed Cooper, a man wrongly hanged for a crime he didn't commit. However, when Jed miraculously survives, he's cleared of his crimes and made a US Marshal, so that he can legally enact revenge on those who left him for dead. So Hang 'em High was actually the first American-made western that Clint Eastwood starred in after his iconic turn as the man with no name, and he does a great job of channeling that popular persona into a new character that felt distinct and fresh. The film also benefits from a great supporting cast and an excellent score, making Hang 'em High a Clint Eastwood western that's easy to recommend, especially given how often it gets overlooked. So at number 7, we have Pale Rider, a 1985 western that Clint Eastwood starred in and directed. And the film follows a mysterious, nameless preacher on a pale horse who shows up to assist a persecuted mining community from a ruthless landowner and his hired guns. Now this might seem like a fairly generic western plot, but what makes Pale Rider so memorable is how it blends supernatural and biblical themes into the narrative, creating a sense of mystery and wonder that really elevates the plot into something special. The film also includes a lot of memorable performances, standout scenes, and an open-ended conclusion that allowed the film to stay just as relevant and impactful now as it was when it first released. Next up, we have High Plains Drifter, the first western that Clint Eastwood ever directed that he also starred in. And the movie centers around a mysterious stranger who rides into a remote town full of cowardly residents, who are still reeling from the brutal murder of their marshal by a group of outlaws. As such, the sharpshooting drifter agrees to help them, but never once reveals his name, suggesting that he might have an otherworldly origin. So much like Pale Rider, High Plains Drifter dabbles with supernatural and biblical themes, while at times almost feeling like a horror film. And even by today's standards, High Plains Drifter is an incredibly daring experimental western, making it all the more impressive that it was the first one that Clint Eastwood ever directed, as it really is one of a kind. At number 5, we have A Fistful of Dollars, a 1964 spaghetti western directed by Sergio Leone. And the plot follows a nameless poncho-wearing gunslinger who rides into a small border town torn apart by two rival gangs, who he decides to meddle with for profit. Now at the time, Clint Eastwood was a relatively unknown television actor that simply accepted the role for a quick payday. But little did he know that this film would totally change his life, because thanks to the inspired revolutionary direction of Sergio Leone, A Fistful of Dollars proved to be a cinematic masterpiece. And a huge component of that success was the unforgettable performance from Clint Eastwood in the lead role, who set the template for a whole generation of anti-heroes, in a movie that was so good that it practically made him a superstar overnight. At number 4, we have For a Few Dollars More, a sequel to the previous film, once again directed by Sergio Leone. So as you would expect, Clint Eastwood reprises his role as the man with no name, this time teaming up with a rival bounty hunter, played to perfection by Lee Van Cleef. So after the success of the previous movie, you would imagine For a Few Dollars More would have a difficult job reaching the high bar that it had set, but somehow it managed to top it, proving just as revolutionary and daring as the first film. And once again, Clint Eastwood elevated the movie with a flawlessly cool performance, while masterfully riffing off Lee Van Cleef and further cementing himself as a rising star of the genre, in a film that is still regarded as one of the best sequels ever made. Up next, we have The Outlaw Josey Wales, which was the second western that Clint Eastwood both directed and starred in. And the film follows the titular Josey Wales, a farmer who attempts to avenge the murder of his family during the Civil War, becoming an infamous outlaw in the process, who's forced to make a new life for himself on the run. Now in truth, that synopsis doesn't really do the film justice, as The Outlaw Josey Wales is an incredibly complex, layered tale of revenge and redemption, filled with memorable characters and unforgettable moments. So the film really feels like a personal testament from Clint Eastwood as a director, but at the same time he also delivered one of his richest performances in a western to date, balancing grit, vulnerability and wry humor as his character transforms from a hardened killer to a protective family man before our eyes, in a film that even Eastwood himself considers to be one of his very best. So at number So narrowly taking the top spot is The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the third entry in the Dollars trilogy from director Sergio Leone. And once again, Clint Eastwood steps into the iconic role of the man with no name, who this time finds himself locked in a three-way hunt for a buried fortune, during the chaos of the Civil War. And from his very first scene to the legendary final standoff, Eastwood's performance is the embodiment of cool, well and truly establishing his character as the definitive anti-hero of cinema that has since inspired countless imitations. It also helps that the film itself is a sprawling operatic masterpiece that blends breathtaking visuals with an unforgettable score, again somehow improving on the first two films of the trilogy. So for me, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly has to be the greatest Clint Eastwood western ever made, because it really is hard to think of any other film that he starred in that has left such an indelible mark on pop culture, thanks in large part to his iconic performance that essentially paved the way for all the many other amazing westerns that he starred in later on. But let me know below, what are your top 3 Clint Eastwood westerns? And if you enjoyed this video, you might also like this one right here.